I sent the divorce letter to my cheating wife's table while I was having dinner with her lover. I stood there, watching everything: the sophisticated restaurant, the glasses of wine, the discreet laughter, and her, sitting at the table with him, laughing. In my hand, I held the divorce letter. Adrenaline coursed through my veins, but my expression remained calm, unshakable. I already knew everything, every lie, every excuse, every look she gave me while hiding secrets behind her forced smile. The worst had already happened. It made my decision. I would end it in the most precise, surgical way possible. She didn't know I was there. She had no idea it discovered the truth. Her lover, the man she claimed represented her future, was so engrossed in their game of seduction that he didn't even notice me approach. The moment she saw me, though, it hit her like a shockwave. Her face turned pale, her lips trembled, but she still tried to maintain composure. I placed the letter on the table between her glass of wine and her plate. Her eyes darted to the envelope as if it were a bomb about to explode, and, in a way, it was. Her lover looked stunned, while she stared at me in disbelief. Then came the tears. Whether they were of regret or despair, I couldn't tell. She tried to speak. He tried to justify their betrayal with pathetic words that only made him look smaller. "It's not what you think," she murmured, her voice breaking. But I didn't need to hear her lies. I already knew everything. I had followed her every move, watched as she stabbed me in the back night after night. I could have confronted her sooner, but I waited for the perfect moment. And now, her lover sat there, bewildered, clueless about the storm I was about to unleash. I turned to her, my voice calm. "You should read this," I said, gesturing toward the envelope. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Her breathing quickened as she read the words that would seal the end of our marriage. But it wasn't the divorce that shattered her. It was what I said next. "Your future with him," I began, gesturing toward the man now squirming in his seat, "isn't what you think. He's not who you think he is. He's a scammer, an opportunist. He never loved you. He only saw you as an easy way to get rich." She blinked, confused. "I've been watching everything," I continued. "I know about the money you've been sending him, the investments you've made. He's been using you this entire time, just like you've been betraying me." Her lover, previously silent, started shifting uncomfortably. He didn't expect this. Neither did she. "You betrayed me for a dream," I said, "and now you're trapped in a nightmare of your own making. And when you need him the most, he's going to leave you." Her tears flowed freely now, tears of regret, of realization. But it was too late for that. I turned and walked away. She called after me, begged for another chance, but her time was up. The lover disappeared that night, just as I predicted. And she was left to face the ruins of her choices alone. What happened to her after that? Well, that's another story. Welcome to our channel, where we explore stories that delve into the devastating consequences of betrayal. Each narrative is fictional, designed to highlight how betrayal can destroy lives and relationships in irreversible ways. Remember, those who betray always pay the price. Buckle up, because you're about to hear a gripping story full of twists and turns. The tension between Sarah, John, and Peter was palpable as John continued, his voice calm but cutting. "I investigated you, Peter," John said, leaning closer to the table. "Your name isn't even Peter, is it? You go by different aliases depending on your target. And your last two relationships?" Those women ended up financially ruined while you disappeared without a trace. Sound familiar? Peter's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Sarah's eyes darted between John and Peter, her face a portrait of confusion and disbelief. Is this true, Peter? Sarah's voice cracked as she spoke, her gaze now fixed on him. Peter finally broke his silence. This is absurd. He's just trying to manipulate you, Sarah. Don't listen to him. John chuckled darkly, pulling a small stack of papers from his coat pocket. Really? Then maybe you'd like to explain these. He tossed the documents onto the table. Sarah picked them up with trembling hands and began to read. Bank statements, false identities, and even a police report from another state, all pointing to Peter's history of deceit. Her face crumpled as the reality hit her like a tidal wave. Peter, is this true? She asked again, her voice barely above a whisper. Peter stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is ridiculous. I don't have to stay here and listen to this. Sit down, John's voice boomed across the restaurant, silencing the quiet hum of conversation around them. All eyes were now on the table. Peter hesitated, but sank back into his seat, clearly out of options. John turned to Sarah, his expression softening slightly. You thought you were running toward a new beginning, Sarah, but all you were doing was running into a trap. And you almost ruined our family in the process. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she shook her head, unable to form words. And as for you, John said, turning back to Peter, I've already reported you to the authorities. They'll be very interested in hearing about your little schemes. So I suggest you enjoy your last moments of freedom. Peter's composure finally cracked. He glared at John, but said nothing, knowing there was no way out. John straightened his tie and glanced at Sarah one last time. I loved you, Sarah. I really did. But this is where it ends. He slid the divorce papers closer to her. Sign them, and don't ever contact me or the kids again. Without waiting for a response, John turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Sarah sobbing and Peter frozen in his seat. As John stepped into the cool night air, he felt an overwhelming sense of liberation. The weight of betrayal had been heavy, but now, with the truth out in the open, he was free. Free to rebuild his life, to heal, and to focus on what truly mattered, his children and his own happiness. And as he walked away, the sound of rain began to fall, washing away the remnants of a past he was finally ready to leave behind. Peter, I discovered your true identity, the scams you pulled on other women, the fraudulent deals you involved Sarah in. Did you think you could get away with this? John's voice was implacable, satisfaction laced with the tone as he finally brought the truth to light. Sarah, in shock, dropped the envelope and sank back into her chair, as if the weight of realization had physically hit her. Tears filled her eyes, not tears of regret, but the anguish of being doubly deceived. I trusted you, she whispered, looking at Peter, her voice trembling and breaking. Peter, silent until now, finally spoke, his expression hardening. Sarah, but she interrupted with a sharp gesture. No, she shouted, her voice quaking with anger and pain. You used me. John watched the scene unfold with mixed emotions, satisfaction at exposing Peter, but sadness as he saw Sarah crumble under the weight of her betrayal and realization. This moment, inevitable as it was, didn't bring him as much relief as had imagined. Peter, sensing had lost control of the situation, stood abruptly. His secret was out, and there was nothing more he could do. Without another word, he hurried out of the restaurant, leaving behind a trail of lies and betrayal. "That's over," John said calmly, his gaze fixed on Peter as he disappeared through the door. Sarah remained seated, her hands trembling and her tear-streaked face staring into space. Around them, the restaurant's sounds faded into a muffled backdrop, leaving them immersed in the emotional wreckage Peter had left behind. John's stance remained firm, but inside, a storm of conflicting emotions churned. This was not the victory he had envisioned. While Peter's deceit was clear, seeing Sarah broken stirred emotions he couldn't easily categorize. Sarah, breathing heavily, looked up at John, guilt and shame painted across her face. "How? How could I be so stupid?" she asked, her voice weak and laden with regret. John took a moment before responding, his voice measured but raw. "I've asked myself the same question, Sarah. But it's not just about you. Everything, happened because both of us let it. We both got lost." Surprised, Sarah looked at him, the unexpected vulnerability in his words cutting through her despair. "What?" she whispered. John sighed, the words coming slowly, each one heavy with meaning. "All these years, I distanced myself. I got so caught up in keeping up appearances, in making our life look perfect, that I ignored the signs when things started falling apart. I didn't want to face it." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes again, spilling over as she shook her head. "But that doesn't justify what I did," John continued, his tone firm again. "I was still here. I didn't walk away. You did." Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Sarah couldn't meet his gaze. She knew he was right. There was a stark difference between the mistakes he acknowledged and the betrayal she had committed. John took a deep breath and spoke again. "You can still change things. I'm not saying we can go back to how we were. That's over. But you can be honest with yourself. You can try to fix what's left." Confused, Sarah met his gaze. "Fix what?" "I have nothing left," she murmured. "You do," John replied firmly. "Our children. They still need you. I don't know what the future holds for us, but they don't deserve to pay for our mistakes." At the mention of their children, something broke inside Sarah. She'd been so consumed by her desperation for something new, for escape, that she hadn't thought about the ripple effects of her actions. John, sensing her shift, stood and put on his coat. "I'll watch the kids this week," he said. "Take time. Think about what you want. About who you want to be." Sarah nodded, her voice caught in her throat as she watched him leave. As the restaurant's lights dimmed and silence settled, Sarah was left alone. The life she'd known had crumbled, and the uncertain path ahead loomed like a shadow. The days after were a blur. Sarah stayed home, surrounded by the ghosts of her choices. Pictures on the walls mocked her, reminders of a life now broken beyond repair. She looked in the mirror and saw a woman she barely recognized, consumed by regret. John, meanwhile, focused on his children. He initiated the divorce, not out of spite, but necessity. The betrayal had left him hollow, his trust shattered. His primary concern now was shielding his children from the fallout. When Sarah finally mustered the courage to see John again, it was at their children's school. As she approached, she saw him standing by the car, his expression a mixture of calm and sadness. They exchanged a brief nod, united only by their shared responsibility as parents. Their children ran toward them, laughing, blissfully unaware of the fractures in their family. Watching them, Sarah felt the weight of her actions anew. For John, the betrayal hardened him, but he resolved not to let bitterness consume him. Sarah, on the other hand, sought therapy, determined to confront the emptiness that had driven her choices. As for Peter, his life unraveled as expected. On the run and scheming anew, it was only a matter of time before justice caught up with him. John and Sarah's love was gone, but their shared history and their children bound them. Time passed, but the wounds remained, a stark reminder of how betrayal scars not only relationships, but also the people within them. If you enjoyed this story, share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know how you felt as you followed this journey of betrayal, regret, and the search for redemption. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this, where every choice serves as a lesson.